Anita, how's your mental health?
Questionable at all times. You know this.
Yeah, how's the mental health of your children?
Also a little bit tricky. Can I tell you my experience in trying to find therapists for myself and my kids, Mel?
Yes, please.
Okay, this is how it goes. You ask around your friends and your family for a referral for somebody who's nearby. You finally find somebody who sounds like they might work for your family. You give them a call and you find out that A, they're not accepting new patients, or B, they have a huge wait list. So you start over again and you ask people if they know anybody who would be a good therapist and a good fit. Finally, you find one, you go and you meet with them, and you figure out that you don't actually like them that much. But it's been so much work to find somebody who you can go to in your area that you're kind of stuck with them. Well, do you have any ideas for how to get around this?
I do because guess what? I've actually had some therapists that I have found on my own, which involves what you're saying. Sometimes I remember one time I was like 3 hours in the bathtub on my phone looking
Yeah.
through websites. I was such a prune at the end. But I have also had the experience with working with BetterHelp. And it was like, I don't want to say too good to be true, but because it is true, but it's like amazing because I was matched with my therapist within 24 hours.
And you didn't have to go through all of that other ridiculous process of trying to find somebody. And here's the cool thing too, is if that person didn't work out for you, you can just switch and say, and it's not like you're committing to another years long search for somebody who you're going to jive with.
It's true. And I lucked out, or maybe just BetterHelp is really good at matching people together because I never had to change my therapist. I loved her. Perfect fit for me. And I know that some of our friends have used BetterHelp and they've had to change therapists, and boom, same day, you can change.
Easy peasy.
You can ghost your therapist. Get a new one.
I love this idea. BetterHelp is one of our sponsors. If you use our promo code trybetterhelp.com/WWDN, you get 10% off your first month. And we totally recommend it.
Yes, get some therapy. That's trybetterhelp.com/WWDN. Anita, guess what?
What?
I have started doing online therapy.
Okay, you told me about this. You're doing it with betterhelp.com, right?
I sure am.
Tell me more about it. How does it work?
Okay, so I filled out a questionnaire and then I was matched to a therapist really quickly, like within 24 hours, and we were already communicating.
Ooh, how do the sessions actually work? Is it video conferencing or what?
Yes, you can do video conferencing, you can do a phone call, or you can use the allotted time to instant message with your therapist. So say you're not feeling really great about speaking and you would prefer messaging, or you're in a place where you can't speak, you can still do your sessions there.
Interesting.
It's kind of awesome.
So how's it been going?
It's been going really great. I love how easy it is to communicate and how it's not dependent on where I live and where the therapist lives in order to help me with my needs, like with my grief stuff or anxiety or whatever. So I feel like it's a really great service, and I think that other people should do it.
So, Mel, obviously you've done lots of therapy in the past. So how does this compare to those experiences?
I am such a fan of this online therapy, I have to tell you, because I didn't have to find a therapist and hope that it worked out. I don't have to pay $150 per session, and I don't have to drive an hour to my session and then an hour back. I'm a big fan. It's very convenient.
It sounds like a great idea, especially during a pandemic. It sounds like a great idea anytime, but especially right now when people are stuck inside their house, or if people just don't want to drive because they're lazy like you.
Totally. Or if people have 4 kids like you and they want to die.
Totally true. So we're really excited because we have a new partnership with BetterHelp.com, and our listeners can get 10% off of their first month of counseling if they sign up at, what's the website, Mel?
Try BetterHelp, HELP.com/WWDN, which stands for Widow We Do Now.
Amazing. I am thinking that I should sign up too, Mel, and see if it's going to work out great for me like it's working out great for you.
Yeah, and you know what's awesome? They do individual therapy, they do family therapy, and couples therapy.
Well, couples therapy, yeah.
So when you and I get in a fight, our first widow-wife fight, we can go to BetterHelp and get a session. And just a reminder, this is not a crisis line, and it's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online.
That sounds great.
BetterHelp is available for clients worldwide, and you can log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. Widowing is hard, and not widowing is hard. Everybody needs better mental health. Start living a happier life today. And remember, our listeners get a 10% discount off their first month. And again, the link is trybetterhelp.com/WWDN. Happy widowing! Hi, Anita.
Hi, Mel. Nice to see you again.
You too.
How are you?
Fine. We had a little bit of drama with a neighbor's dead cat yesterday that I will not go into because it is very, very disturbing. But I was the one that found the cat. So let's continue on.
Okay.
Your turn.
I came inside my house last night and my 3-year-old had a chef's knife and was hacking at a watermelon. So that was fun. And then right before we started recording today, I went outside and he had a rat trap in his hand, like holding the scary end. And you have to like walk this line of like, like, don't freak out, but oh my gosh, get over here right now, you know? So it was like, put that down, put that down, put that down. And then he thought I was crazy because I was freaking out. But he still has his fingers, so it's all good.
Great. Nobody died yet.
Nobody lost a finger, except for a cat, apparently.
Well, the thing about the cat is it was already dead. It actually died in the summer, and it went missing from its grave a couple days ago, and then I found it.
Ooh, it was
exhumed, and that earlier in the morning I woke up, and I looked outside, and I saw what I thought was big, beautiful eagle flying around, because we're in the mountains. And then I looked at it perched on the tree, and I saw 6 more. And I realized that no, they were not eagles, they were vultures.
Oh my gosh. That's a little bit disturbing, especially in a pandemic. You're like, when vultures show up around your house, that's a little bit disturbing.
I have to say, seeing vultures around the house, it was a very rainy day. It was misty. It was very gray. It was like the worst weather. Mixed with that, and there's a lot of stress in our house right now because there's a big online Broadway thing that's happening that's required a lot of coordination that my friend I'm living with is in charge of, and it's like very insane. And so that, plus we have the new rescue dog, plus this cat situation. Yeah. Yesterday I thought I was living in a Hitchcock movie. It was pretty great. But no worries. I found the cat's remains and gave it back to the neighbor, and then I went to bed and I had many, many dreams of PTSD type material, and now I'm here and everything's fine. And Scotty, my dog that has never even had an accident in the house, is so mad at me because there's a rescue dog in the house. And when I came in the house from collecting the cat remains and then taking them to the neighbor, he looked at me on my bed, and then he peed on the bed, and then he ran out. So it was great. I had a great day. It just was like really great material for a movie or like a comedy sketch, I think. It was fine.
Okay, we'll compile it.
That was a very long tangent. But we have great news today, but first we need to introduce ourselves. Who are you?
Good job, Mel.
I'm Mel.
I'm Anita.
I already told you.
Who are you? We're a couple of young widows trying to figure out.
We do now.
Widow, we do
here's
now.
A song, here's a song, here's a song. Da, 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 da. Okay, we have a very special guest today. I'm very excited about this. This guest is actually not a widow.
This is our first husbanded
matrimony
plus guest. I don't know. Anyway, what's our guest's name, Mel? And why
our
is she
special
so
guest is LMFT Kristi Naumann. Yay! applause. Does that stand for licensed marriage and family therapist? Oh, I thought it was licensed mother effing therapist.
Only for you, Mel.
So Kristi's daughter was going to write a really amazing bio for her, but she did not get to it. She's very busy. So will you, Kristi, tell us a little bit about yourself?
You bet. So as Mel said, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have been practicing for about 8 years. Before that, I graduated from BYU in family science and then promptly started my family. And I'm a mom of 6, and that took a lot of time. So when I got to be about 40 and I had a lot of people die in my life, I decided to go back and get my master's, because that's what you do. You know, you have to rediscover who you are when death kind of comes into your world. So I decided to do that at 40 and have been working with couples and individuals and teenagers, all sorts of family issues. Grief is one of the things that I do a lot of work with, just because everybody has grief. Everybody experiences it. So that's a little bit about me.
Will you tell us a little bit about the situation surrounding your choice to go back to school with your multiple deaths?
You bet. So I got a call Sunday morning, May 2nd, and my dad was sobbing, and my dad was 81 at the time and not a man that is given to sobbing, and said that he had come downstairs and found my mom had passed away. She was in the motion of crocheting. Her hands were holding the yarn and the crochet hook as if she were just doing a stitch, and her head was just back, her mouth was open, and her eyes were open. And it's like her heart just stopped, and it was really quick and painless because there was no pained look on her face. It was just, she was just gone. And that was a huge surprise for our family. She was a huge part of our lives. So at that point, that was May. At that point, my second oldest sister was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And she decided not to have any treatment. And so she, in October of that same year, also passed away from the effects of breast cancer. And then 2 weeks after we buried my sister Nancy, my dad was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme 4, which is the most aggressive form of brain cancer that you can have. He decided to have it operated on, that he never recovered his anything. I mean, he couldn't walk, he couldn't take care of himself. So just a week and a year and a week after my mom had passed away, my dad passed away. And then the week after that, my niece Jenny passed away. And then I had 2 uncles within 3 weeks after that, within the same month, also passed away. So within a year, there were 6 deaths in my family. And it just rocked me. It just shot out all the foundations that I thought that I had. And so I really found myself adrift, not knowing who I was. My parents were gone. I was an orphan. I was 40, but I still, I felt gypped because my kids were little. I'm the youngest of 9. I felt gypped that my kids were going to know their kids, or their grandparents. And, so it was a bit of a struggle. It was a bit of a struggle. And I kind of disappeared in my studies. And luckily, I have a really amazing husband that Mel can attest to, who let her live in my basement for a time with her dogs, who he is allergic to.
Thanks, Wayne. You're the best.
He is the best. But I kind of disappeared into my studies. I felt like I had to, in order to survive the grief. But in the learning and the growing and the becoming, I figured out how to grieve and how to kind of swim in it and allow it to be part of me and not just push it aside and disregard it, but actually to let it be present and acknowledge it. And by doing that, it became more of my ally. It became more of something that I could rely on, not in a dark, sinister way, but in a I'm alive and I feel kind of way.
That sounded totally like a therapist and amazing.
I thought it was interesting that you said that grief is your ally. And you mentioned, you like described it a little bit, but can you tell us some details about that? Because for me, sometimes I feel like as long as I shut off my feelings and everything's just going smoothly, that's when things are quote good. And then I'll have like last night I had like PTSD dreams, and I'm like, I'll see Scott in the dream, and then it's like it destroys me for like days, and then I'm upset and I hate that. And so for me, it's interesting to hear you say that grief is your ally, but I wish that I could, I'm learning through this journey like how to do that. Can you tell me how it's your ally? How was it your ally? Like how long did it take you to get to that place? And then what different forms has it taken as an ally?
Probably, it took a while. I feel like I didn't really grieve until probably the summer after my dad died, after the wave of death happened. I don't feel like I grieved for my mom really hardly at all until after. So it felt like everything was on hold, and I just had to get through. We had to sell their house. My dad got married in the midst of that before he got sick. And then we went and took care of my sister Nancy, and then I started school that January. And then, my dad came out of surgery and then had all of this recovery. So there was a lot of, I'm just going to put it on the shelf. I'm setting it aside. I've got to get through this. Right. So it definitely didn't act as my ally at that time. It was really a burden. It was something to put away. It's something I was running really fast from. But that summer after my dad died, when I started to feel, when I started to have wave, like I'm standing in the ocean and sometimes it's calm, and then suddenly a huge wave comes and it just knocks me flat on my butt. And then I'm trying to get back up, and I go along pretty well, and things are just kind of a little bit wavy, and then I'm, another wave just knocks me down. And I started to recognize my pattern, or how the grief would come for me. And it was always around family time. It was always around memories. It was always around, there are certain things that made it kind of rise up. And that was definitely so hard to know how to do that. But once I started to recognize that rhythm and how it was moving through me, then it was almost like I could anticipate the wave, and then I rode the wave rather than it knocking me down. It actually propelled me forward to do things that I, like opening my private practice. I never would have done that. And there are just some things that it propelled me to do. And that's why I say, if I made it through that, I can do anything. And it really, does that make sense? That's how I started to be able to feel that, and not that it was just this horrible thing anymore, but as I anticipated it and I worked with it and I let it lift me, and both up and down, then I learned how to allow it to be my ally rather than fighting.
So basically, you're a grief surfer.
I'm a grief surfer.
Cool.
Yes.
Got it.
I love that. So we've talked about this before, but I think that I'm in a stage where I'm still trying to figure out the rhythm of my grief, because Mel and I have talked. Sometimes we assume that unless we had a huge life insurance payout, we don't really need to know anything about investments or even finances. But guess what? A little knowledge of finances is critical for all of us. Maybe your partner was in charge of that stuff, and now you find yourself making all the decisions. Maybe you're mad about that. Maybe I am. Nicole from the He's Gone But the Money's Not podcast is here to help. She tackles financial literacy by telling the stories of women and widows and finance experts and shares the lessons they've learned as certified financial planners. Whether you know a lot and feel confident in your financial decisions or feel unsure about all of that stuff, there is more to learn. Listen and subscribe to the He's Gone But the Money's Not podcast on all podcast platforms. This ad was paid for by Rockhouse Financial, an SEC registered investment advisor. About how sometimes I expect there to be those big waves and then the big waves don't come. And then sometimes just out of the blue. And it's so frustrating to not be able to anticipate that because you are just getting pummeled by waves sometimes. But actually just today I was noticing that something that I can anticipate a wave coming from is the things that my husband used to do and only he used to do. So for instance, we have a bike trailer that hooks onto the back of the bike. We call it the bike train. And he always put on his bike and he took the kids for rides, right? Only him. I never did this. He was the only one. He would take the kids for a bike ride. So when my kids were like a couple weeks ago, they were just begging me to set up the bike train. And I got so grumpy and I was just like in this bad place. And it was because like that was making me confront, like, Dad's not here, you have to step in. And then just today they were like, Mom, can we set up the hammock? I never set up the hammock. That was always Dad who set up the hammock. So again, grumpy, like irritable. And I was like, oh, like I'm noticing something here, a little bit of a pattern to that. So it's interesting that you say that. I'm just in the stages of trying to figure out some of the ebb and flow of it. And it's hard. So it's tricky.
And it wasn't always predictable. I don't want it to seem like, it's like, oh, there's a song. Oh, there's the last time we had Easter, my mom was in my back. Right. It's not always that way. There are unpredictable parts about grief. Those waves that it's like those rogue waves that take you, like you think you're fine. And then suddenly you're driving down the road and you see a stupid billboard sign and it's like, it's sometimes it is just random. I just try to really find a way to be okay with being knocked down rather than just trying to fight against it and allowing the wave to just take me where it would. And that took a lot of practice. And every experience is different. I still had a huge foundation of family and friends to, that were dealing with similar situations. I wasn't alone trying to deal with the grief. I had we were arm in arm with the same grief, my sisters and my brother, and that made a huge difference.
So Kristi, I have a bunch of questions for you. So my first question is there are like a million types of therapists, I feel like, right? So you're a licensed marriage and family therapist. There's licensed clinical social worker. I feel like there's like 2 other acronyms for them. Can you explain what the difference between the different versions of therapists, and also like, are there certain specialties that are better suited for certain, situations?
Well, let me explain the acronyms, the letters behind the name first. So licensed marriage and family therapy. We focus a lot on what's called systemic theory, the family system, and how the family system works together. Within the family system, everyone has rules and roles that they play, and they play off each other. For example, in a family that has an individual that may struggle with anxiety or depression, that person becomes the identified patient in the family. everyone sees them as the sick person. They always take the most energy. They get a lot of attention. And if anything were to change, if that person were to try to become well, what the system tends to do is keep that person sick so that the family system can continue to be functional and the status quo is maintained. So marriage and family therapy, we look a lot at family systems. I do a lot of couples therapy because of that, looking at the emotional connections between families. That doesn't exclude me from doing individual work. And I work a lot with trauma because of that's an interest that I have. But modality wise and philosophy wise, we're looking at family systems a lot more. Licensed clinical social workers, LCSWs. They typically take a broader community look at things. So they're going to be looking like social workers typically start out working in the community for DCFS, Division of Child and Family Services. That's kind of their forte to begin with. And then, but they're also not limited. They can work with individuals, they can work with families, they can work with couples.
Okay, so LMFT, LCSW, are there more?
Yeah, the last one is the mental health. It's MHC, MHCH.
Good grief.
Mental health clinical. Now, it's something like that. It used to be licensed personal counselor. They used to be LPCs, but it's MHMC. But anyways,
MICKEY MOUSE MFT.
Maybe it's the CMHC, Clinical Mental Health Counselor. That's what it is. Clinical CMHC, Clinical Mental Health Counselor.
Did I hear a niner in there somewhere? Sorry.
And they typically look more towards addictions. They have a really rigorous training around addictions and the addictive brain. That doesn't mean it excludes them from doing any other types of therapy, but typically their specialty is more in line with addiction recovery.
So within each of those categories, are there specialties that you specialize in after you've gone through schooling? Like, you can be a doctor and then you become a cardiologist. So like, do therapists generally have like a subspecialty? Like, are there people who specialize in grief, or are there people who specialize in, you know what I'm saying? Like, are all counselors, you can go to all of them for anything, any of your needs?
Well, technically you can go to any therapist for any of your needs. But to answer your question, almost all therapists have specialties. They all have things that they prefer to do or they're better at. When I started, I was convinced I was going to be a play therapist, that I was going to work with little kids. I did it for like 3 months and I'm like, oh, hell no, I'm not doing that. And I have 6 kids, so you think that I could do that, but it was slow. It's really like the progress is really slow. You do a lot of play, you do a lot of coloring, and it's just really, really slow progression. And I was just like, I'm gonna not be able to do this. So I really quickly figured out that teenagers is a niche that I have, and working with teenagers and trauma, attachment injuries, those that are adopted, that's an area that I really, really love. Trying to help individuals repair attachment injuries that have happened in those early years. And so that's why I worked into it's called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a form of trauma therapy that helps the brain reprocess traumatic events, including grief. So that's where my specialty kind of wraps around grief and holds it in. Grief is not my main focus, but it is definitely an area that I feel comfortable because I've experienced it, as well as being able to walk with someone as they heal, as they, pull it out, look at it, address it, and then it goes back in a much healthier, reprocessed
So I have a question
way.
about EMDR and who needs it. So obviously, a young person that has lost a spouse has experienced a traumatic event. Because it's a traumatic event, does that mean everybody that has experienced loss as a young widow or whatever age should do EMDR? Or are there people that benefit more than others?
I would say I don't know a person that wouldn't benefit from EMDR, because there's not a person that hasn't experienced trauma. Now, if we're talking about big trauma, which is being widowed, having a spouse die when you're young, when you have children at home after just a few short years, that's a big T trauma, right? But everyone has little T traumas that populate their lives from the time that they grow up until the time that they die. So it's my opinion that everyone benefits from EMDR, because as the little T traumas start to pile up, it becomes big T trauma. And that's when we can get stuck in depression and anxiety, because we can't let go of the little T traumas. So yes, grief is a great way EMDR is a great way to help and process through grief. But like I said, I don't know anyone that wouldn't benefit from EMDR.
Can you just give us a quick explanation of how EMDR, or what you do, what the experience is for people who aren't familiar with it?
You bet. So I have they're called tappers, and they're like buzzers that give a vibration off, and they alternate side to side. What's called bilateral stimulation. When that happens, we bring up a memory or an experience that may have been hard or troubling or difficult, and they think about that memory, that experience. They allow the memory to populate their mind, to light up their mind while the tappers are tapping and doing the bilateral stimulation. As they do that, I ask, where are you feeling this memory in your body? Where is it showing up? Because the body stores all of that information, what we feel, what we hear, what we see, what we sense. All of that is stored in the very cells of our body. So our body has memory more than just our mind having memory. So I ask for them to bring up that memory, and how does it feel in the body? And often, if it's grief related, it'll be over the heart, it'll be in the chest area and the shoulders. It'll feel heavy, like it's hard to breathe. That's a really typical place where the body stores grief and sorrow. And as they bring that up, I'll ask them, to allow that to just sit in their body. I'll then incorporate maybe a negative thought that they might have around that experience, like I'm not good enough, or I'm never going to feel better. I'm always going to be broken. Anything like that. And then we tie that together with the emotion and the memory. And then what we'll do is we'll reprocess with those tappers going. We'll allow them to just kind of sit with that image. And it's usually eyes closed processing. So it's a lot of internal processing. And what happens is we bring that memory forward into the short-term memory banks. And we look at it in different ways. So I'll ask questions like, what do you notice about this memory? And a lot of times as we work through it, it'll be, well, it doesn't feel as hard right now. I feel stronger right now. And there's a process that the brain starts to move through that enables the brain to resort it and put it back in a way that is healing. It is in a positive way, uplifting and emotional. And often what we'll see is a positive thought, a positive cognition at the end, which is, it can be anything. If the negative thought was, I'll never get over this, it's like, I can do hard things. I've already done hard things. So in putting it back together, we always try to tie it with a positive cognition so that it allows the brain to re-identify this memory and this experience. And then often what happens, almost always what happens, is I'll go back and I'll say, what are you noticing in your body? And if it's not completely clear, then we'll keep processing it until it is, because the body needs to let go of that stress, of that memory. And with the reprocessing, it can.
Are there times where somebody's trauma may be too traumatic to do EMDR? Or what would you say to somebody who's like, well, I don't want to bring all the memories up. I just want to, get through therapy, but that sounds really scary.
Well, of course. And so I'm always going to honor that. And any good EMDR therapist is going to recognize that there has to be what's called resourcing at the beginning. I'm not just going to jump into the real traumatic, hard memories at the beginning, because we need to set a foundation. So we're going to create a peaceful place, and we're going to create a container that can hold some of those heavy things that maybe we can't process through every time. We're going to resource smell and touch and sight and hear. We're going to resource all of those internally, so that as things get difficult, and they do, there's resources put in internally for them to manage it. And we go at the pace that the client can go. And if they say it's too scary, we put it away and we move to a different thing. One of the things that I do is called EMD. So it's eye movement desensitization. We don't reprocess. So it's looking at a memory. We stay in the present and we look back and we look at that memory, and it's like, ooh, wow, that's really hard. Okay, come back to present. How you doing? Let's breathe. Let's breathe. Let's breathe. Okay, let's go look at it for a minute. And all the time, my tappers are going, right? Because we want that bilateral stimulation to allow the brain to see this in a different way. So then we'll look back again. Okay, what are you feeling about it now? It's getting a little bit less. Okay, come back to present. And we'll do that over and over and over if they're not ready to move to that reprocess stage until they are ready.
Okay, so I just want to tell you, so both Mel and I have done EMDR, and it's bizarre, I would say, is the explanation I have for it. Like, I told my therapist that I felt like she was just scrambling my brain, and then at the end it was like somehow it felt better. And I was like, I have no explanation. You just made me feel nutty for a minute, and then I feel better now. So thank you very much. Here's my money. It's that's the best explanation I have for it. But it's also a little bit surprising. So when I was doing it with my therapist, one of the memories we were dealing with was some of the feelings I have about not cluing in and not catching on to what was going on in Jason. And I was feeling a ton of guilt about that. So we went into the EMDR process, and my therapist, we went through that same process that you kind of just described. And where we ended up was not where she thought we were going to end up. When we got to the end, and I was feeling really at peace with it. And she was like, wow, it's so interesting what the brain does, because you think you can predict what it's going to, and it just kind of meanders its way to where it feels good about it. And where I felt good about it was not trying to convince myself that I shouldn't have done anything. It was just that I came to the place where I didn't do anything, and that's it. Not trying to absolve myself of guilt, but just trying to, say that this is what happened. So it's a really interesting, weird thing that I don't even know how somebody figured it out to do it. One gripe that I have, and Mel has the same gripe, is the stupid 5 stages of grief crap. And I'm going to be very honest right now. I have seen a few counselors, and even the therapists have talked to me about them, as in like telling me about the 5 stages, and I just want to shake them. Why don't they know? Shouldn't they know that there's no such thing as 5 stages of grief?
Yes. Yes, they should.
Okay.
Because it's ridiculous. There are 1,000,005 stages of grief times 10,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And I think that was one of the things that that the people that I work with in grief, I have a picture that talks about it's a horseshoe.
Yeah, we actually have that we put a picture of that on
Good.
somewhere on our Facebook page or on Instagram. So we know what you're talking about.
But
Keep
still
going.
tell us
If you
about
don't know
it because our listeners probably don't.
It's much more realistic, but even with that, it looks really clean and like you're just going to go through this process. And the favorite picture that I have of that grief picture is there's like scribbly lines back and forth and all over the place, and it's not neat and orderly. It's a mess. Grief is a mess, and it's your own mess. And no one can tell you how grief is going to be for you. And yeah, there are things like anger that you're going to probably feel. And there are things like overwhelming sadness that you're going to feel. There's going to be bargaining that maybe happens. There maybe is going to be, shaking your fist at God that's going to, there's so many different things, but it really can't be uniformly defined. It really is just, it's what you need. It's what you need as you move through that grief.
So along that line, when do you know that your grief isn't quote unquote normal? Do you know what I'm saying there? Like, we know that it's variable for every single person, but is there a point where you know that like you need additional help or something's not right about your grief process? Does that make sense, that question?
Absolutely. Because grief can kind of dip you into some mental health issues like depression, like anxiety. If you get to a point in grief where it is, well, like diagnostically, if we're looking at a 6-month time frame where you're not able to get out of bed, where you're not eating consistently, where you don't sleep through the night, and there are no positive days in that 6-month period of time, that's clinical depression. And that's where you've got to get help to get your brain back in balance. And grief is one of those things that can knock your chemicals in your brain out of balance. So going to a therapist or even your family doctor and just letting them know that this has been a significant, it's got to be a significant and steady period of time that you're having these symptoms. And there are some really great assessments, and you can do them. They can be self-assessments. You can look them up online and you can do them. One is called the PHQ-9, and that measures depression. And the other one is the GAD-7. And literally you can Google that and you can self-score yourself and be like, oh, snap. If I've got major depression and I've had that for a substantial amount of time, I really need to get in and look at maybe some medication that's going to help to balance out the chemicals in my brain.
So one thing that I learned about in this grief journey that I did not know about before was that it's totally normal to be this way that I'm going to describe. But I also didn't know this term. And the term that I learned was being passively suicidal. How common is that? And can you tell a little bit about it?
Passive suicidality is just really, it's like, I really don't care about being alive. And it would probably be a lot easier for me and everyone else if I just weren't here. The difference between passive suicidality and active is I'm going to be looking for ways or plans to end my life. I'm going to be thinking about it nonstop, planning about it, looking for ways that, this would work. That's active. Passive is you're sitting in your car and the train track's right in front of you and you're like, man, it'd sure be nice if that train would just hit my car. Right? That way I wouldn't have to deal with anything. It just would be done. Or, you're driving and it's like, I think I'm just maybe, I bet if I could just swerve right over there and just run into that wall, that wouldn't be so bad. And so it's fairly common, especially like probably within the first 6 months of a pretty intense experience with grief and loss, especially when you're dealing with like your person that leaves, whether your spouse, whether or a child, someone close like that. Often it's easier to imagine being dead than it is continuing to be alive. Did that answer your question?
Yes. I just thought it was so interesting because it's like when we hear anything with the word suicide in it, we just think it's active suicide, being actively suicidal. And I've learned since that there are so many that feel passively suicidal, but didn't know that there were words assigned to it. So, and it's tough. There's a lot. I mean, you don't even have to go through a dead spouse to have something like that. Like, it's, of course, because trauma and grief is universal and loss. Yep. But first of all, you have to recognize that you are passively suicidal to do something about it, correct?
Correct.
Say that you have recognized that. What are some things somebody could do if they're feeling that way?
So one of the things that I like to talk about is recognizing that grief is a form of trauma. So if we're looking at trauma as a whole and grief fits under that umbrella, it affects your brain in a different way. So in the center of your brain is your amygdala, which is the emotion center. If you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, it's all of those little blobs of color, the anger, the happy, the anxious. It's all of those blobs kind of running the show. And that's your amygdala. And when you have a trauma, and like I said, grief fits under that trauma umbrella, your brain kind of gets stuck in that trauma and it doesn't respond the way that it normally would without the trauma. And so things that might be easily managed before you've experienced the trauma suddenly become like huge events, and your amygdala goes, wah! And it freaks out and it disconnects your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking brain. And it says, nope, I'm in charge. We're going to be flooding your body right now with adrenaline and cortisol. And cortisol is a stress hormone. So it does this over and over and over in response to trauma. And so when you have an elevated or an activated amygdala, then your brain just has a really, really difficult time calming down. So I love to use your senses in calming the amygdala. So really, and I call the amygdala Amy because it's really hard to say amygdala over and over. So Amy, we want to distract her. We want to get her out of this activation stage. So that means, smelly lotion, or an Altoid in your mouth, or chewing on ice, or listening to some music, going out for a walk, some sensory way of being able to calm or distract Amy.
So is that in the category of a grounding technique?
Yes.
Okay. I had heard of that before, like with like PTSD sorts of things, and like if you are like hypervigilant or you cannot get your brain back to like the here and the now, mm-hmm. that it's helpful to like hold on to something and describe something, or tap your fingers or tap your toes. So it's considered a grounding.
It's a grounding. Yeah. We're just trying to distract Amy, because if Amy can be distracted, then your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, comes back online and it's like, oh, I think I'm okay.
Excellent.
Okay, I have one question that's kind of not that serious, but a little serious. And then I have one more serious question. But I think it's a good question. I mean, obviously, because I came up with it. But Do you really get offended when you get fired? Because, like your therapists are always like, you have to click with me. And if we don't click, it's fine. But like, really, do you feel like that? Or you like really feel sad when somebody's like, you couldn't help me, I want somebody else?
Well, I don't get offended. I do feel sad. I do feel sad because there's a part of me that wants to help everyone.
That's what I felt like was the truth, but I felt like people were lying about it. So I'm just glad that you were honest about it.
I do say to my clients, if you're not feeling a connection with me, I don't have the time or the energy to be offended. And I really don't, because it's not about them getting help from me. It's about them getting help. I do believe that I can help most people. I've only had probably 2 people in my career that have, one that I kicked off of my caseload, and one that aced out.
I want to hear about the drama.
HIPAA says no.
We don't know their name.
That's true. Can you explain the difference, what happens emotionally between a quick and sudden death and a long and drawn out death? Is the response in the body different for those 2 scenarios?
Absolutely.
Explain.
So I have actually personal experience with that, because my mom's was quick and sudden and my dad's was long and drawn out. Quick and sudden is an abrupt attachment injury. It's like a sudden thing that your brain doesn't know how to comprehend. It doesn't know. It's such an abrupt attachment injury that the brain literally spirals out of control for a while. And that's often when the PTSD stuff kind of sneaks in, where we're hyper vigilant. We have nightmares, or we can't sleep, or it's much more long lasting traumatic wise than a slow processed death. Because with a slow processed death, your brain has the opportunity to recognize the end. Even though you don't know exactly when it's coming, it is a process of saying goodbye. So it is an attachment injury, but it's like, okay, and Mel, you can just close your ears and you can probably just cut this out, but it's the difference between a cut episiotomy and a torn episiotomy.
Oh, okay. Poor Mel.
I'm scared of nothing. You guys don't know about my rope swing accident.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I want to block that from my mind forever.
I do too.
So I am allowed to be part of the conversation.
But it's just, one is a little bit more clean and precise, and one is jagged and messy and a little bit harder to heal from.
Interesting and gross. Thank you for that visual.
Okay, Kristi.
Yeah.
So one thing that I've noticed and we've noticed is, everybody, their trauma is the worst thing to them. And so it's so easy to compare. It's like, well, yeah, but mine's worse because like I had no chance to have kids. And Anita could be like, well, mine's worse because I have kids and now I have to take care of them and I'm doing it alone. Or someone could be like, well, I had this happen and this is the worst. First of all, please tell us how unhealthy that is. And not that Anita and I like do that to each other. I'm just like putting examples out there for people that are listening, because like it all goes through our minds.
Right, for sure.
I wanted Kristi to weigh in and tell us which was worse. Okay, answer Mel's question. Go ahead.
Yeah, can you please tell us about that and how unhealthy it is and how we can stop doing that in our heads?
So there's just no way to compare. It's not comparable because you're looking at 2 individuals who have had a different upbringing. They have a different support system. Even if 2 individuals had exactly the same life, they could have a different response to grief and loss. And so one isn't worser because of circumstances. It just is how we process it, how we manage it. It's our grief, it's our experience. It can't be compared.
I just listened to a podcast with Brene Brown and David Kessler, and I loved what he had to say about it. And he's like a grief researcher, and he was saying that whatever happens to you is the worst. It always will be. Like that's what the worst is whatever happened to you. So
yep. Because how could I understand? How could I possibly understand what it's like for you? My life isn't yours. I don't have the same situations. I can't step. You know, people say you'll never understand until you walk 1,000 miles in their shoes. It's true, and I will never understand, because it absolutely, my grief is worse and your grief is worse. It just is.
Okay, we have one final question for you. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
Okay. So what's the first or the most valuable or the most helpful coping technique that you teach to people who are going through grief or trauma? Is there one? And if there is one, can you share it with us?
So there is so much research out there that says if you can connect to a higher power, it will help to calm your brain. So along with using your senses and those grounding techniques that we were talking about earlier, really the element and principle of connecting with a higher power and allowing the burden of your grief to be shared by that higher power calms the brain.
That is not what I was thinking you were going to say. So actually, I'm kind of excited because I feel like you told me something new. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Kristi, thank you so much for joining us. You are the best. And your hair is pink. I would like everybody to know that.
I think that this was so interesting, and hopefully it was really valuable for our listeners to be able to get a little inside peek into the therapy world, and that some of those questions were helpful, hopefully, or whatever. We don't really care.
You know, and I guess my goal is to maybe take away the stigma a little bit more of going to a therapist, because the reason that we are trained in the things that we're trained in is because the brain sometimes just needs, the brain and the heart and the body needs some help. So going to see a therapist is actually one of the bravest and the most healthy things that a person can do, because keeping it all inside and not letting it out, it's going to get out in one way or another. So by asking for help and allowing someone to walk with you on your journey, that's the best way to get to a better sense of self.
Wow.
You can surf together over the waves of grief.
Yes.
Cool.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope that you found this to be useful information. Let us know if you have any questions or if there's anything that you would like to share with us. You can get to us on Facebook and also email. And we will see you the next time we come up with a time to record a podcast during the apocalypse.
Which is a whole other thing. Yes. I'm Mel.
I'm Anita.
And I'm Kristi.
And we're just two young widows and a therapist trying to figure out widow we do now. There's like a half a second delay. It's bad.
And sometimes like your word, yeah, it's bad too. This is my favorite thing to discuss with you.
Tell me, what is it?
One of my favorite things. I do enjoy tacos and cheese and dogs. This is about how you cannot pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a phone plan, especially when you're a widow, your person is dead, you might have kids, you might need another option, and you just want your phone to work, you want unlimited texting and service, and you want it to be like $25 a month.
It blows my mind that they have plans that start at $15 a month. That is so cheap. And the cool thing is it uses other 5G networks, and so you don't have to pay extra for that, and you still get great service.
Yep, Anita and I have traveled all over, and I have used my phone. So I highly recommend it, and my mom's even on it. When my dad died, we put his phone down to the cheapest plan, which is $15 a month. And I think my mom's on the $20 a month plan, and it's so worth it. It's so much cheaper than what we were all paying before. So I highly recommend it if you're on a budget or not. Who cares? Ryan Reynolds is in charge of the company, and they send you free stickers with Ryan Reynolds temporary tattoos. It's kind of the best. So if somebody wants to sign up, what can they do, Anita?
Go to trymintmobile.com/WWDN. Seriously, you guys. Such a great idea. Save yourself some money.
And if you're worried about losing data or having any changes with your phone, not going to happen. They walk you through it. Everything's fine. It's the easiest process of all time. Again, that's
trymintmobile.com/WWDN.